Richard's been taking parachutists to aloft for how many years, Richard?
21 years.
21 years. He's seen a lot of warm meat go out of the aeroplane. Obviously they enjoy themselves. They have a lot of fun at it. I don't think I would. But Richard's got some stills and some movies to show you. So Richard, it's over to you.
Folks, my name is Richard Ewing. I've been flying since 1976. And interestingly enough, a bit like Kenny Pittman, who said that he likes to go down there because he's the boy, somebody said to me on the last meeting, "What are you doing here, Ewing? You're not nearly bloody old enough." And that works really well because I'm a lecturer at TAFE and I spend most of my time with addle-brained adolescent kids who are mucking around with motor cars. And as far as they're concerned, anybody over 30 has got one foot in the grave and the other on a banana skin. So being looked upon as one of the young people works for me. As I said, I've been flying parachutists since about 1990. I'm still flying jumpers, and I've got about 2,000 hours of jump time. I've got a twin endorsement on a Britten-Norman Islander that an enormous number of people are very, very cruel to. I think it's a lovely old aeroplane. If you don't like it, well, I'm not going to talk to you. It's been terrific as a private pilot to pick up that sort of experience. It's really great. It's a very interesting little issue with the Civil Aviation Safety Authority that quite some time ago they allowed a dispensation for private pilots to fly jumpers and for private pilots to tow gliders. So it did give me a great deal of satisfaction when I was in America at one Oshkosh, when I had a chap there telling me that America was the home of the brave and the land of the free, and no area had nicer, more pilot-friendly rules than America. And I said, "Your guys can't fly parachutists with a private licence, can you?" He said, "No." I said, "Ours can." We win. Folks, the purpose of today's session is to introduce you to flying jump aeroplanes, what's involved, and to give you a little light-hearted introduction to sports parachuting. If you think that everybody who leaps out of an aeroplane has a death wish, well, I really hope to change your mind. I've got an awful lot of people that are return customers. I must admit, the first time I did it, I was talking to my mum. This is flying the aeroplane, not leaping out. I was talking to my mum and she said, "What was it like?" And I said, "Look, it's really interesting, but it's the first time I've been up in an aeroplane full of people and come home just by myself." So that's kind of neat. Along that line, when we were flying down at Lake Clifton, one of our senior boys was a pilot with CALM, and we'd seen a couple of bushfires, and he said, "Listen, would you mind having a yarn to the bloke at Perth Centre?" Back in the days when we had such things. "And can you ask him to ring this phone number and just give him these coordinates?" So I said, yeah, we can do that. So I called him up and said, "Share my uniform request," and we went through the usual bits and pieces, and he said, "Yep, right, I'll look after that for you. Many thanks." And anyway, we got up to the drop height and everybody got out. And he called me back when I was on the way down, and he said, "Listen, can you talk to that bloke in your aeroplane, because neither of those phone numbers have answered. So can you see if there's another phone number?" And I said, "Well, I would, but he's jumped out of the aeroplane." And one of the boys from the Aero Club said, "You've no idea how silly that sounded." So let's start with the one about visiting a drop zone. If you come along to a drop zone and you feel tempted to drop that really fabulous original line, I don't see why anybody would jump out of a perfectly good aeroplane. Geez, I'd love $1 for the number of times I've heard that. Don't. Consider this, that according to legend, there was an old Indian in Arizona and he was watching operations at this particular American drop zone. And he made the comment, "What for you jump out of perfectly good airplane?" And fact or fiction, that message has really caught on. So any ground-bound non-jumper who voices such thoughts is instantly branded a wafu. So if somebody comes along and displays contempt, they are just simply branded a wafu. So at least you know what people would be liable to call you if you come up with things like that. Why do people do it? Why do they jump out of aeroplanes? Well, why do people race motor cars and motorcycles? Why do they fly aeroplanes? Why do they just simply ride motorcycles around? Some of the guys I watch on the freeway, they're interesting people. Why do they surf monster waves? Because they can. You know, if you think about this, why do we get involved in any particular activity? It's really about what you perceive to be good fun, what you perceive to be a rewarding activity. Certainly I can suggest to you that the folks that I'm involved with have a really good safety conscience. They are careful people. I'll show you a couple of videos of people who perhaps aren't as careful as they might be. They're all about 18, 10 foot tall and bulletproof. You might have remembered being like that a long time ago too. But by and large, yeah, the safety thing is there. Skydiving is an extreme sport. It's an adrenaline rush. It demands quick thinking, it demands concentration and coordination, and all the people involved in it say it's great fun. From a personal perspective, I thought it was required to at least do it once. There is absolutely nothing like the sensation of stepping out the door, climbing out along the strut at 3,500 feet and thinking to yourself, this is a really bloody silly idea. But it's good fun. Let's talk about the aeroplanes. Probably the most common aeroplane used is the Cessna 180-182 series and the 185-206. High wing. If you look at that, that's the Hillman Farm aeroplane, DKR. It's a 182E, much loved piece of equipment. Just spent a lot of money on it because CASA have changed the rules and the aeroplanes have had to go from airwork category to charter category, so there's a lot of bits and pieces that we have to do. Good aeroplane. Very, very forgiving aeroplane, as is any 182. The primary modification for the aeroplane is the door. If you look at the door there, you can see that it opens upwards. If we have a look at Busselton's aeroplane, which currently is undergoing a little bit of refurbishment, it's a 182Q, the newest 182 on the circuit, beautiful aeroplane to fly. It just kind of looks a little second-hand at the moment. To people who've said, gee, the interior is a bit rough, I always say to them, imagine you get 5 big people with all this gear on their back and they climb into your car and then out again. And they do that every half an hour for several thousand times. You can imagine the poor little bits of plastic on the aeroplane get a little bit weary. If you have a look top right of the picture, what you'll see is a handle there. That's an over-centre handle arrangement. So the door is pushed up and that over-centre handle locks into place. If you look bottom right of the picture, you'll see a section of the door that has been cut there and permanently installed, or at least semi-permanently. Reason for that is so the door can open and miss the strut. The other part of the modification, you can see that the important person in the aeroplane has got a seat and all the peasants sit on the floor. That's my story anyway. Looking at that from the back, there's my corner of the aeroplane, and you can see the door, the way it operates out. The aeroplane's originally a 4-seat aeroplane. It is licensed to carry 6 people. Needless to say, we fly it with minimum fuel. We fuel it after each sortie. But there is 1 person next to me, 2 people in the area of the rear seat, and 2 people in the area of the baggage. If you sit down and do the weights and balances and the gross, you find we're pretty close to the margin. So pretty well every load is taken off at full gross. We move up to the twin. There's the Britten-Norman Islander, lovely old girl, 2 300 horsepower engines, makes an awful lot of noise, doesn't go very fast, kind of like flying an airborne truck, but hey, 600 horsepower gets people up to 10,000 feet pretty quickly. The Islander, all we do is take the rear door off the Islander. So the mods in this case are just simply the removal of the door, and there is a large mat that everybody sits on inside the aeroplane. This will take 10 parachute jumpers. What you've got to be a little bit careful of is the big fat blokes who look in there and say, "You beauty," and go to sit up on the back step. If you let them sit up on the back step, the centre of gravity goes really, really nastily south. So nobody sits up on the back step unless they're very, very slight, usually fairly good looking. In terms of the operation, when we look back at the Cessna, the people get out, they hold onto the strut, they walk out onto the wheel. If you want to make yourself terribly unpopular as a parachute pilot, you forget to put the brake on. When they step on the wheel, they all want to have a little talk to you about your parentage after you get back on the ground. That's interesting in that it's a little bit easy to do. One of the things you do not do is you don't put the park brake on. For very obvious reasons, we don't want to land the aeroplane with the park brake on. There are several people who've made themselves famous for doing that. So one leans on the brakes, and that works pretty well, except that when they all climb out that side, you can imagine we've now got a lot of asymmetric pull, and the aeroplane tends to turn to the right. So the natural instinct, of course, is to crash in a good deal of left rudder. If you do that and forget to keep that pressure on the right-hand brake pedal, the wheel starts to turn, people start to fall off, and nobody loves you anymore. The Islander has no such dramas in terms of such things happening. They're a long way away. You can see, if you look up top right, you can see a little handhold. The bottom sort of rightish, you can see that foot section that they can walk along. There are handles to hold. Silly people come too far forward because there is a big propeller running there. The story is one hitting your twins more than one hitting your crowd. We've had a couple of people who've got perhaps a little bit closer to the prop than they should have. There is now a big red line that says don't go any further than this. They really have to lean a lot because the step finishes before you get there, but if they tried really hard, they might make a mess of the propeller. When you let the people out, our typical speed is about 80 knots. Most of our folks here flying, you can appreciate the problems with the Islander. You have pulled the left-hand engine back to idle. The folks are all running to the back of the aeroplane. We've got the aeroplane on crossed control and all the weight is running to the back. You've got to keep your eye on the ball because the aeroplane could very easily slow down and fall out of the sky. Spreading skydivers radially around the sky is not part of the deal. Sad to say it has been done. There was the case of an old Lockheed Electra, not the 188, but the old radial engine one in the States. And skydivers are funny people. They love getting out and crawling all over the aeroplane. And sad to say, this boy got a bit distracted and it stalled it, and over she went into a spin at about 14,000 feet. Most of the jumpers got out of that. A couple of them were still inside. They didn't, and neither did he. So it is one of those things that you really have to take a bit seriously. What else should we talk about there? Well, nothing much, because after this aeroplane, we get to the stage we're moving into an area that I only look at and admire. We have Piper Navajos and Chieftains, then we get up to the turbines. Cessna Caravan, York runs one of those. Beautiful aeroplane, goes up like a rocket, comes down like a lead sled, because you can just simply pull the engine back and bring it down. Engines on our recips, of course, we've got to keep them warm. So in both our cases, we're looking at about 130 knots, 17 inches, 2200 RPM, which brings the aeroplane down to about 1200 feet a minute. That looks after the engines. My mate Glenn Capel said to me, none of the skydiving mob ever make TBO, time between overhauls, with our engines. I said, we do. We haven't busted a cylinder, and we've got to time between overhauls. We've got to be doing something right with the engines. With the turbines, obviously hot starts is the issue, and there are many people, I'm sure, who would know much more than I about turbines. But those things only work where you've got a lot of people there, so you can fill the aeroplane up perhaps 4 times over. They fuel the aeroplane, up it goes. We take typically about 35 minutes for a sortie to 10,000 feet and back. The Caravan that I had the privilege of going for a ride in does it in 15. But it costs $1.5 million second hand. So obviously they're looking to run the thing up and down about 4 times. By that time everybody's on the ground packing their parachutes. They can shut it down, refuel the aeroplane, and away they go. All right, well, let's talk about the jump training. You know, I hear many people saying, oh, you're flying the meat bomber this weekend, Dick? And yes, putting out live ordnance. And then I see another bunch of people saying, yeah, those little light sport aircraft are really good, except they all sound like whippersnippers. And probably we ought to embrace all of our bits and pieces, because there's not really all that many of us. But between parachuting and gliding and commercial ops as well as training, we're still a pretty small voice in the aviation industry. So, yeah, I guess my message, because I've been involved in all of those, is, yeah, have a look at what the other guy does. And sometimes it's quite fun. Yeah, just put him through. This is basically a training video. It only goes about 6.5 minutes. These people, you can see, are just having a bit of a horse around. You can see various configurations of people doing their little bits and pieces. We're going to talk about the accelerated freefall jump, the tandem jump, and the static line jump as a training experience. This guy here will give you no doubt that a high-performance parachute is actually one of the things you can break a lot of bones if you're careless, because they come in pretty quick, and if you get your flare height a little wrong, you can find the ground. Okay, accelerated free fall. This is probably the jump of choice. This is being taken by a helmet camera. Notice the student gets out with 2 instructors, one on each side of him. I can't emphasise how important being stable. You can see that classic arched position where they're back like that. The object here is to get a stable fall. If you talk to parachutists, they like to talk about this as flying. I like to talk to them about falling, because that's essentially what they're doing. But bear in mind, they're doing terminal velocity of about 100 miles an hour, heading straight down. The young bloke there is doing some exercises before he deploys his parachute at about 4,000 feet. This is the ride that you give somebody if they are looking at just the experience. And this is the tandem skydive. This is a compilation of a couple of different tandems. See the little drogue parachute that has been tossed out? That's not the main chute. The purpose of that is just in case somebody decides he's terribly frightened and he's going to turn himself into a little ball, that this is going to defend him from happening. Kevin Wall, an old mate of mine, who incidentally is a high school maths teacher, taking his student out. This is filmed by a wrist-mounted camera. So you can see at this stage, he's tumbles a couple of times and gets the thing stable. Student's doing exactly what she's told. There's the little drogue parachute coming out at that point there. At this stage now, you're probably doing a good deal less, but you're doing a good 80 mile an hour towards the ground. If you have a look at the girl's face, which you'll see on a couple of occasions, 80 miles an hour of airstream does some pretty funny things to the most attractive of frames. Does some really funny things to some of the frames that aren't perhaps quite so attractive. It's very interesting how many people take a breath when they leap out of the aeroplane, and they go for about the full 30 seconds of the skydive. And the tandem masters often say you hear this when the parachute opens. So often they're just holding their breath, but it doesn't take much effort to breathe if you do open your mouth. At this stage, you can see them under canopy. Now the canopy is a bigger canopy. It's around about 550 square feet. It's obviously big enough to support 2 people. It is steered by a couple of toggles which just simply pull down on the trailing edge. So if you pull down on the right hand side, it just simply turns right. Pull down on the left, ditto. When you're coming into land, because bear in mind this is an aerofoil, this parachute, all they do is pull down on both of those, and as they come down on both of those, what's going to happen is both of the trailing edges will come down. You just simply arrest the forward movement, and if the jump master has done it right, and they usually do, you'll see, just catch the glimpse of them coming down. Typically there's somebody on the ground as a catcher. They will pull those toggles. In windy conditions they'll just pull one, and that will simply collapse the canopy. Kevin is doing the slide in on the backside arrival. The only important thing the person has to do is pull their legs up. The third option is a static line jump. Here we're at about 3,500 feet. The student is going to climb out on the strut and the wheel. Pilot being very careful not to dislodge the student. That's 10 marks against you. And he then looks in, lets go, and you can see the parachute is opened by a cord about 7 metres long. When that gets to the end of the travel, it just simply pulls the cord. Following out is a couple of fellas there, and they're just doing a little fun jump, typically referred to as a hop and pop. If you're hopping out at about $3,000, you're hopping out of the aeroplane, deploying the parachute straight up. This is just the boys having a little bit of a play around, and you can see that the descent rate on the parachute gets fairly significant. If you put the parachute into a steep turn, like an aeroplane, we drop the nose, lost a fair bit of lift, and down it goes. You might like to contemplate with these people, one of the things they like to do is arrive at the airport, just like a fighter pilot, big steep turn and swoop into land. And just like that thing, The difference between a Top Gun and a dill is sometimes about 2 feet. If you come screaming in a big turn and you just get it a little bit wrong, you might finish here up to about your rib cage in the ground. You can see that the descent rate with the parachute is fairly significant. And here's a couple of the boys just coming into land. Again, what they're doing is setting the thing up into wind. These have got a forward speed at best of about 20 knots. They do like a bit of wind in their face, and then they will just pull down that back end and touch. This young bloke tells the story. He has just finished his jump. That was fun. Thanks. If you can swap that. Okay, just a quick review on those items. The accelerated free fall, typical of the training method used these days. Out at anywhere between 10 and 12,000 feet. The student goes out, as you saw, with 2 instructors. They're there to make sure he stays stable. If he doesn't remain stable, anybody who pulls an arm in can finish up spinning like a top. Think about this. If you were to deploy the parachute when you're doing that, the parachute would rotate around you, and as a little witty lass said to me, you've got the rest of your life to think about your mistake, all 30 seconds of it. As they progress with that, they work in stages. As they progress, what's going to happen is it will go from 2 instructors to 1. You might have noticed on the side of their jumpsuits they've actually got hold positions. They hang on to the student. After a little while, after he's confident the student is good, he will let go and just back off a little bit and make sure the student remains stable until he deploys his parachute. Then he's got a whole new set of things to work out. The tandem, of course, that's just an experience thing. It's the best option. If people say to me, I'd really like to jump out of an aeroplane just to say I could, okay, go do a tandem. You get with a person there, and you're probably only going to require a briefing of about half an hour, as opposed to the other methods where you're probably going to spend 6 or 7 hours in training. And the experienced parachutist handles all the tricky bits. You get to do a free fall, you get a parachute ride, and as long as you remember to pull your feet up, that's the only important thing, there's very little chance that you're going to come to grief. I actually thought it was a good way to learn. I did a static line. I hold the record of the highest static line ever put out at Green Hills Parachute Zone. The boss said to me, if you get lost, it serves you right, we're not even going to come and look for you. The idea of only being about 3,500 feet is if somebody sort of freezes up and just sits there, okay, he won't drift too far. We've had a couple of those. Each time the parachutist does a static line, okay, he will get a bit more of a feel for the air. And when the instructor's reasonably happy, he'll give him a dummy ripcord. So this guy will come out and he will go, right, fold the 2 arms like that because that keeps you still balanced, pull the dummy ripcord. If he can do that 3 times, they actually give him a ripcord and let him pull his own parachute. He has a device called an altitude activation device, little barometric device. So if he does all those things right and then does it wrong, if he falls through 2,500 feet, this thing will pop his parachute out for him, and then the instructor suggests he go and do golf or something like that. Here's a little thought for you. I'm sure all of us at some stage have had a hand out the car's window and just messed around with the slipstream. These guys are doing 100 miles an hour. You typically go through the first 1,000 feet in 10 seconds, accelerating. Each subsequent 1,000 feet takes 5 seconds. You are learning to manoeuvre your body laterally while you descend, and your flying lessons last 30 seconds each. So you can see from this that what we've got is a very rapid learning curve, or you spend a lot of time in training. I've emphasised that stability thing because if you read those stories in the pre-ejection seat days, there were people who hopped out of Spitfires, Hurricanes and what have you, who were a bit concerned about the bad guys squirting machine guns at them and actually decided to delay the opening. There's a very good passage in that in Richard Hillary's book, The Last Enemy. And Hillary talks about, essentially, learn as you do skydiving. Unfortunately, a lot of guys just simply went unstable and spun, wrapped the parachute around them. So this stability thing is very, very important. Now, bearing that in mind, have a look at this one. This is a little light-hearted look at a bunch in Arizona having some fun. And part of their fun is riding all sorts of things. Motor cars, hot water systems, lounge chairs, all sorts of bits and pieces. When you're watching it, what I'd like you to see is the way the car behaves. For some reason or other, they've got a thing against Hondas. All of the little cars are Honda Civics. Honda Civic convertibles. They've got a whacking big car. You can imagine, in conjunction with their land of the free, can you imagine if you took a little motor car up in an aeroplane and chucked it out somewhere over Australia? I think you'd go to jail. These guys are playing around with these things, and there's just a little bit of intro there showing what they're doing. At this stage, they're taping up everything on the motor car or taking off things on the motor car that are liable to cause some harm. Here we are in the CASA with people in the motor car and people pushing the motor car and people sitting on the outside saying, let's film this and see what happens. So with a mighty shove, out she goes out the door. Now, the problem then comes, somebody's out there and filming. Look at the effect of stabilisation or lack thereof. This one didn't work at all. That's two of the folks out, there's the other two folks out, and that came alarmingly close to the cameraman, who made the comment that, yeah, he decided he would stay a bit further away. Now, at this stage, you can imagine that would be an absolute rodeo ride. There's no way known that you are going to sit in that motor car, and you certainly wouldn't want to be in it at that point there. These guys are playing around with lounge chairs, they're playing around with push bikes and motorcycles and the inevitable little red Honda Civic. Ask yourself, what don't they like about Hondas? Well, they might have a nasty experience with a motor car in years gone by. But you can see, very popular, the ones that were actually made as convertibles and the ones that they got out the CIG gas axe and turned into convertibles. You can imagine that these guys, even though they're doing a lot of mucking around like this, they are kind of concerned that they might get something stuck on the car. Out goes the car, upside down. If I remember rightly, this one is moderately stable. There you are. I didn't say perfectly, just moderately. And this is just simply rocking backwards and forwards. The folks are now able to sit in the car with a careful eye on the altimeter until somebody falls out, and then the whole thing goes back to front and sideways. If you're going to ask me why would people do that, my answer is I don't really know, but they certainly do. That's the aeroplane. You have a look at this. This is a very serious chunk of CASA aeroplane. It's got two very big radials, and it's a jet-assisted takeoff aircraft into the bargain. So the fuel bill is one that I don't know that I'd really want to pay, but it obviously works very, very well as a jump ship. You can see outboard are the auxiliary fuel tanks, inboard are the jet engines, inboard of the tanks. You can see here, nice little background noise, there's a guy here just inspecting where we are in terms of the drop zone. And he's just poised for a departure. Once again, a very, very untidy exit. But upside down. Well, why is the comment? What you'll see with some of them is they actually tape up the underside and they put a flat plate, usually plywood, on the underside, and that does work well. You can see this is basically into a spin. The difficulty with this is there isn't an elevator or an aileron or a rudder to push and prod, and so the inevitable is the result, that it just simply arrives at the deck. And here's all the folks arriving, and they see the bits and pieces and finally claim victory. It's quite interesting to look at the car like that. When you see the ground view of the car, it isn't very high. Well, you know, it's one of those things I look at and I think, jeepers, you know, if anything goes wrong, we always hear about it. There we are in a lounge chair. It's a fairly hazardous exercise starting to play with something heavy, because that can come across and meet you and you may not like that at all. That was a golf cart that disappeared out, a large tractor tyre, okay, a motorcycle, again the inevitable Honda Civic, and assorted bodies disappearing out in lounge chairs, lounge suites, and there's somebody on a hot water system, a shopping trolley. I bet the shopping centre owners like that one. And lo and behold, here's the car yet again. Somebody on a bicycle in company with a twin beach. Some of these things last well. The fella in the lounge chair lasted around about 30 feet before he fell out, I think. But they're fairly reluctant to commit to seatbelts to things like motor cars, because it is important that you be able to get out. Thank you, sir. What happens if the parachute doesn't open? We give you your money back. No, sorry, wrong answer. You've got a whole spare one. So everybody carries a reserve parachute except, guess who? The pilot just gets a lousy old round parachute. I do point out that the aeroplane is my main, and I don't expect to use a reserve parachute either. The World War II guys, they always used to say, you know, if it doesn't work, bring it back, we'll give you another one. Okay, what's in it for me? Anybody who caught a little glimpse of me with a couple of gorgeous young ladies, the deal there is that the Islander has a right-hand seat. There we are. The Islander has a right-hand seat, and as a net result, we're allowed to take people along because that's separate, it's barred off from the cabin, and these pair were just absolute delights. And their mother said at the end they got a ride each one time because their boyfriends and cousins or something were doing a tandem jump, so they came along to watch it from the top. And their mother said, come on, you've got to get a picture with the pilot. So the pilot protested a lot, you can see that, but they got their picture. Next one, if I may. And the pay is lousy. Just as well I got a private licence, and somebody from CASA might be listening, so no, you don't get paid. But hey, how hard do you have to work in industry to finish up with a view like that out of your office window? That's mine. Any questions, folks? Yeah.
It's not a lot to do with parachute jumping, but could you tell me what happened to the aircraft that used to stick out of the roof of the Hillman Farm campground?
The question was, what happened to the aeroplane that sticks out of the Hillman Farm roof? Now, on the clubhouse, and I probably should have brought down a picture, there's a 180 from about the tail back that it just sticks out of the clubhouse roof. It's a very effective thing. Pretty disappointing story because somebody ground looped it and wrecked it, and we cut the tail off and stood it up there. We have, however, wired up the rotating beacon, so it's nice. The beacon flies as well. The front of that aeroplane is used as a training aid. So yeah, that's part of it. There was one quite well publicised where a guy had dropped a screwdriver in a competition glider, and he was very concerned about that, and he leant down to pick the screwdriver up, found he couldn't get it, undid his harness, leant down. Just as he got the screwdriver, he hit a very large bump which banged him against the canopy and dislodged the canopy, and he was scrabbling desperately, and then he hit another bump, and then at that stage he found himself separate from the aeroplane. Most of those things, and the World War II experience is the same. If you're quick enough, it almost doesn't matter if you're quick enough, because now you're not moving that fast. Once you've really accelerated up, it gets much, much more critical, because it's just so easy to do, you know, where's my ripcord? Here it is, with one hand out here, over you go. Now at that stage, lap of the gods. You better hope you've been a good boy. This guy, yeah, he was out, and he said the one thing that it taught him was that you really needed to go through a bit of a pre-flight routine, because he spent a very anxious 10 seconds, doesn't sound like a lot of time, trying to find his ripcord. He got the handle, he got it out, and descended not very far away from the remains of his glider. So generally speaking, those guys do it okay. And the people who get caught are the people who manage to get into a high-speed situation and they get unstable, and that's it. You're very, very lucky if you get out of that one.
I'll tell you a potentially dangerous, but in retrospect funny story. I'm one of the few Air Force guys that has actually got one more takeoff than got landing. And I'm sure George and Ron will tell you stories that many a time we took up paratroopers, and 60 odd at a time, and wondered what the hell they were doing it for. Anyway, for some reason, Ronnie Raff turned around and said, any of you pilots that want to do a parachute jump, you're more than welcome to have a go. So I rather stupidly thought, well, I've never had a go, so put my hand up. And we went to Williamtown, and we spent 2 or 3 hours jumping off of chairs and jumping off of tables, practicing landing on the ground. And then the next thing to know, we got in the back of a caribou and a static line, and we jumped out 3 at a time. And the more we climbed up, the more I'm thinking, what on earth have I volunteered for? Anyway, they told us to take 5 paces off the ramp of the caribou and jump, because there's only 3 paces in there, so you suddenly find that you're not standing on anything and everything's shooting like, oh, thank Christ, it's popped out, you know. And then they said there's 4 risers on these old parachutes, and whichever one you pull down, that's the direction it'll go in, you see. So I thought, oh, okay. And there's 3 of you up there, and you must be, I don't know, 200 metres apart, and you could talk just as though you're in the room. It's quite an extraordinary experience. And we've done it over water. We're not allowed to do it over land. It could only be done over water, this is pilots, because they didn't trust us on the ground. Anyway, so the 4 risers, and whichever one you pull down, that's the direction you're going. You thought, oh, okay, so I'll pull this one down. Next thing I know, that quarter of the canopy collapses. I thought, Jesus, I'm not going to touch that again. I'll just go wherever the wind takes me, you see. And we're looking down on the ground, and there's all these little speedboats. One was allocated to each of the jumpers, so they were going to pick us up from the water. And the idea was that we jumped out at 3,000 feet, and this is at Nelson's Bay near Williamtown, and the hill there is 1,000 foot high. So the idea, what it was, when you got to the 1,000 foot, you undid your box, hit it, you see, and crossed your arms over the top of your head. And which, I looked at the top of the, come down to the top of the hill, I thought, oh yeah, I'm supposed to undo my strap now. Jesus Christ, I'm not undoing anything yet. So I waited till I got halfway down the hill, which is about 500 feet, and sure enough, I bang, quickly put my arms up to lock myself, because you're sitting on this sort of strap, you see. What I'd forgotten was that the lower straps go round and they come to, and they go to the loop into the box. So I got bang, bashed it, crossed up here and hadn't fitted out of the loop, you see. And it was quite windy. I mean, it was far too windy to have landed on the land. I don't know, 15 or 20 odd knots or something. So anyway, we get into the water and I put my arms up, but of course my legs are caught up in the harness, aren't I? So the parachute is dragging me along the water, bottom first, right? So apart from ripping the leg off my flying suit, rather lots of water are going up the orifice, which is pointing in the direction in which we're going, you see. And the speedboat, the motorboat, they can't help you because they've got to go around and collapse the parachute So they spin round, collapse in the parachute. Meanwhile, you've got about 10 gallons per metre going up your rear end down here. And eventually they come back and they pick you up and you're so waterlogged. So that is my memory of a parachute jump, and I've never, ever been again.
But you'd be really, really grateful if you really, really needed it. And that was my comment with my lousy little 26-foot round one. That if somebody knocked the tail off, which is a prospect, or did something really stupid to cause the aeroplane not to want to fly anymore, it might be a lousy ride down in your parachute, but you'd probably be really pleased that you had that option if the aeroplane wasn't going to fly anymore. Thanks, folks. Thank you, Richard.